Welcome to the Fantasy Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Bill Bender. Week 2 is in the books. Isn't that amazing? Like, it feels like just yesterday we were complaining that there were too many preseason games.
And the season goes fast, and as you can see from last weekend, there's always a new story to talk about with each week.
Yeah, so what did you learn? What's the number one thing that you learned from week 2?
Well, I think the thing I've been looking at this week is that the tight end is becoming increasingly important. We saw 4 tight ends go over 100 yards this weekend, and it's not just Jermichael Finley, who everybody knows and loves by now, but some of these other big bodies like Brandon Pettigrew, Dustin Keller, and Aaron Hernandez all went over 100 yards. These are all guys that aren't necessarily elite tight end options yet, but I think as you see as the season moves on, a guy like Aaron Hernandez could be a steal on the roster.
I think he's probably the most interesting guy because here in Charlotte, we got that game. We got the Patriots and the Jets in the afternoon. And I was watching that, and I couldn't believe that he's listed as a tight end because he runs like a wide receiver. He's putting juke moves on everyone. In other words, he's basically like the Madden version of Ben Watson, but in real life.
Right.
And so what I want to know is like, do you see him doing this sort of thing moving forward? If he's out there and would you actually consider taking him as your second tight end?
Absolutely, and what I noticed looking at the splits this week is most of Aaron Hernandez's yardage came in the first half, so you know he's part of the game plan. With a guy like Pettigrew, he had most of that yardage in the second half when the Lions were slinging around, they were behind. So Hernandez, the only problem is he's splitting looks with Rob Gronkowski, another good-looking rookie, so you have to be careful with what you expect on a week-to-week basis. But that being said, Hernandez is clearly part of the plan. Tom Brady clearly likes throwing him the ball. And like you said, I mean, the athleticism is just flat out amazing.
Let's talk about running backs now. A couple guys that at least got to be on fantasy guys' radar. Javid Best was probably drafted in any league that you're in. What do you think about him moving forward? Do you think if you've already got him, does he now automatically become one of your 2 starts?
I think so. I mean, 232 yards and 3 touchdowns. He continues to score. And the Lions, you know, they've been a punchline for a couple years. They've got some nice young playmakers on that team once Stafford gets back. And the other thing with that team, their defense has 10 sacks. So I'm not saying they're there yet, but Javid Best certainly part of the plan. I still think the Barry Sanders comparison's a little bit ridiculous, but at this point he's an every week starter, though you can't expect him to get 232 and 3 scores against the Vikings this week, not up at the Metrodome.
And then there's also the running back in Cleveland, Jerome Harrison, who had a pretty good game, especially considering that it's Cleveland. I guess the most important thing is that he actually fought off Peyton Hillis, who was potentially going to be sharing time with him.
Well, the frustrating thing with owning Harrison, though, is he's only got 85 yards in 2 games in what were favorable matchups. Now he has to go up against those big AFC North bullies, Baltimore twice, Pittsburgh twice, Cincinnati twice, and he's got all 3 of those teams in the next 4 weeks.
So maybe he also hasn't really fought off Peyton Hillis.
Right, yeah, and I think so. And there's something there with Eric Mangini. I don't know if he likes him. I don't know what's going on in the locker room there. I can't say that for sure. But it just looks like that Eric Mangini has it in for Jerome Harrison. He was frustrated last week, and he's going to be frustrated when he plays the Ravens this week. The Browns only scored 3 points in their 2 meetings last season.
So let's talk about wide receivers. Who jumped out at you this week that might be available on a waiver wire pickup?
I think Kevin Walter's back. 11 catches for 144 yards, and I found out firsthand what it's like to go up against a Schaub, Johnson, Foster trio. The Texans' offense is awesome. It's scoring like crazy. It's going to score this week against Dallas. So as long as Kevin Walter is that, sees that favorable coverage next to Andre Johnson, and with the running game going, he could be a nice little pickup, especially in PPR leagues.
I know it's not an exact comparison, but it reminds me of the Chiefs of the early decade with Dick Vermeil, where they had an incredible offense. The defense was suspect. This defense is better than that Chiefs defense, but the Texans have the potential to be like that Chiefs offense where they're just going off every single week, and even someone like, in that case, Johnny Morton, or in this case, Kevin Walter, suddenly becomes a wide receiver 3 play, potential flex play, and maybe even in deeper leads, a wide receiver 2 play.
I agree. And like you said, they're going to throw it around. Matt Schaub threw for almost 500 yards last week. Again, they were in catch-up mode, so some of that with Walter comes in that. But still, he's got to be on a roster. He can be a wide receiver 3 play on a regular basis. And like you said, they're going to score points. They've been that team we've wanted to be good for the last couple years. Now that they're good, it's going to be fun to watch for fantasy owners.
Right, let's wrap this up with the last bit of advice. Who is the number 1 pickup for this upcoming weekend?
I think I'll give you two. I'm going to give you either Jason Snelling or Mike Tolbert just as insurance policies for Michael Turner, who's a little banged up, and Ryan Matthews, who's a little banged up. I'd probably use Tolbert this week because Turner's injury appears to be less serious, and Tolbert could be that goal line puncher against the who are they playing this weekend? I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Well, regardless of whoever it is, like Sproles is likely going to get a lot of the carries out in the field, right?
Right. Well, Sproles and Tolbert and Hester. That's the problem with Matthews being injured is they don't have a tailback, a real tailback, a prototype tailback. They've got three guys that do. Sproles does the stuff out of the backfield. Tolbert's kind of the goal line guy, and Hester does a little bit of both. So that could get messy if Matthews actually has to miss some time.
So just to be clear, you actually sound a little bit more reserved about Tolbert than I've seen elsewhere, where people say like, "Hey, don't get Tolbert, you gotta get him right now."
Right. I think he's more of a fullback, kind of like Laurent McClain. He'll get some touchdowns, but I don't know if the yardage will be as easy as it was last week against Jacksonville in the upcoming weeks.
All right, fantastic. Thanks for joining us on the podcast, Bill.
Thank you.